Lili Boulanger was born in France in 1893. Her father, Ernest Boulanger, had some success as an opera composer after winning the Prix de Rome in 1836 and ended his long career as a singing teacher at the Paris Conservatoire. One of his last pupils was Lili's mother, Raisa Maiskovec, who claimed to be a Russian princess, although there is no evidence to support this. The pupil and the master married in 1878. Lili has an older sister, Nadia, who's a very well-known composer and teacher. In fact, Lili was one of Nadia's first pupils, studying fugue with her in 1911 as an adjunct to her conservatory classes. The two most well-known facts about Lili are that in 1913 she was the first woman ever to win the Prix de Rome. The other most well-known fact is that she died at a very young age, only 24, in 1918. This video centers Lili Boulanger through a critical feminist disability theories lens in order to present a more holistic, sensitive, and respectful history of this important composer. Lili Boulanger has often been written about as a femme fragile, not only because she was one of a handful of women composing in a very male-dominated field in France, but also due to the fact that she was chronically ill. Her disability led scholars and critics to write about her illness in an essentializing way, painting her as a woman whose whole life was denied the possibility of romance by her condition. Lili was diagnosed with bronchial pneumonia at age 2. Then later in her teens, she was misdiagnosed with intestinal tuberculosis for what is known today as Crohn's disease. By 1918, the year of Lili's death, 1 in 6 deaths in France was still caused by TB. There was a stigma surrounding this illness due to the fear of transmission from affected individuals. But people now believe that Lili was being mistreated for TB when in actuality she was living with Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is characterized as a chronic inflammatory disorder in which the body's immune system attacks the gastrointestinal tract, most often resulting in abdominal pain, fever, weight loss, and tiredness. In my research, I've come across a lot of romanticization and pity of Lili's disability through an ableist lens. Previously, there have been rhetorics of her disability and her gender as disabling her, when I argue that it was society that created barriers for her, many of which still exist today. Disability studies in the context of third-wave feminism is often explained through a natural biological context compared with social cultural aspects. First, I'll go over gender. Previous narratives used gender synonymously with biological sex. Nowadays, we have come to separate biological sex and gender, which is a social construct that Judith Butler argues is performative. So, we're not born with gender, but instead, we enact it. Disability studies can be understood in a similar model. On the biological spectrum, there are impairments, which scholar Carol Thomas defines as lacking part of or all of a limb, or having a defective limb, organism, or mechanism of the body. Societally, we accept that it is in fact society that disables people with impairments by creating social barriers that hinder the way people live with disability and engage with the world. Thomas describes disability as a form of social oppression involving the social impositions of restrictions of activity on people with impairments and the socially engendered undermining of their psycho-emotional well-being. Disability and queer scholar Eli Clare writes about the romanticization and essentializing narratives often associated with people living with disabilities. He says, "Strangers pat me on the head. They whisper platitudes in my ear, cliches about courage and inspiration. They enthuse about how remarkable I am. They declare me special." I want to acknowledge that people's experiences living with disability vary. As Lili wasn't able to speak as openly about these theories in politics because of the period of time when she was living, I believe she used her music as a form of acceptable communication to highlight her ways of thinking and experiences as a disabled woman composing in France in the early 20th century. Lili composed Attente in 1910. She set the poetry of Maurice Maeterlinck for soprano and piano. Caroline Potter is the head of music research at Kingston University. She wrote a book about the Boulanger sisters, citing this work by Lili. Potter describes the narrator of the poem as a mysterious figure who seems almost not to exist on the physical plane. She describes Lili's musical setting, too, as an oscillating and complemental figure in the piano which changes but never resolves, suggesting the frustration of waiting. Waiting for what? For justice? For equity? For a more accessible place to work? Lili's choice to use this poem in her composition seems deliberately autobiographical. The climax of this piece sounds like this. The piece climaxes at the line, "Whose lilies may not bloom," where the vocal line reaches its highest note of the song, a G sharp. I think this imagery of the lily not being allowed to bloom represents society creating barriers against Lili from both a feminist and disability standpoint. Setting this song to this poem allows Lili to express her frustration about the inaccessible world around her through the soprano's voice. Lili composed another large work the next year in 1911. This one is called Les Sirènes, set to a poem of the same name by Charles Grandmuguin. The poem talks about a scene from Homer's Odyssey in which Ulysses resists the bewitching song of the sirens by having the ship's crew tie him up, while they are ordered to block their ears to prevent themselves from hearing the song. Lili's sister Nadia actually set the same poem to music earlier in 1905. I'll point out some differences between their musical portraits of this story. Lili's sets her piece for solo mezzo-soprano, chorus of soprano, alto, and tenor voices, and piano. Nadia's setting is for 2-part soprano, 1-part alto chorus, and full orchestra. Here's a selection from Lili's composition of Les Sirènes. Lili often uses the female voice as a soloist. This way of writing allows her compositions and politics to amalgamate in a form of expression. This decision seems to be made to consciously provide a platform for these voices. Everyone's favorite Boulanger sister scholar, Caroline Potter, is back to describe Lili Boulanger's musical setting of Les Sirènes. She argues that Lili's setting is more satisfying than Nadia's, as it is more compact and demonstrating a surer sense of form. Both settings reach a climax at the end of the poem, but while Nadia's fades away rather unconvincingly after the climax and ends abruptly, Lili creates an ABA structure by repeating the first verse of the poem with minor alterations in the piano accompaniment and ends with a soaring vocalise that, as in Nadia's version, appropriately evoke the sirens who tempted Ulysses. Lili's sureness in form and strength of solo mezzo-soprano accompanied by female chorus provides a sense of female empowerment to the setting of this poem. The quote that I highlighted earlier about Lili being denied the possibility of romance by her condition was actually an analysis of this work, and I quote, "The haunting Les Sirènes depictions of the carnal beauty of a woman and maddening allure are especially poignant coming from a woman whose whole life was denied the possibility of romance by her condition." However, I disagree. Lili's setting of Les Sirènes is beautiful and powerful, representing female strength. It's interesting to point out the ways in which Lili has been written about in a historic lens. It's hardly surprising that Lili appeared more confident as a composer than her elder sister. Was Lili allowed to have a public career as a composer because her contemporaries knew her health was precarious and therefore she was unlikely to be a professional rival in the long term? This quote highlights a eugenics response to tackling people's discomfort during the 20th century of women, let alone sick women, presenting themselves as capable communicators and artists in the public sphere. There seems to be a mentality of letting them have their fun because they won't be around that long, so they aren't seen as a threat. This kind of narrative problematically depicts disability as a golden ticket to success. Another problematic narrative that I've come across is dismissing Lili's death as a pity for French music. Many pity her death because her illness kept her from achieving greatness. Now, I'm not saying that her young death isn't sad, or ignoring the physical pain and emotional trauma that may have been attached to a life that this world disables, but I argue that she achieved greatness in her life, and though it was short, her artistic achievements should be celebrated, performed, and heard. This pitying narrative that dismisses Lili Boulanger's death is very prominent in historical contexts. For example, she was actually called a charming muse who died too soon. She wasn't exactly the muse so much as she was the composer. Walter Damrosch presented her Faust et Helene at Carnegie Hall with the Symphony Society of New York on December 26, 1918, the year of her death. He presented her as, "Of the gifts of this girl of 19, there can be no doubt. Indeed, her musical maturity is astonishing. More is the pity that she died so young, as she would surely have achieved a musical personality. But women composers are at best whistling hens." Thank goodness that not all hope is lost. Mark Blitzstein wrote an article for the Saturday Review. It's better than Waltz, but still not great, as he uses a binary of gender stereotypes, which is very of the time. He says, "A woman composer of our own century, almost unknown, no longer alive. How good can her music be? It is more than good. It is extraordinary. Make no mistake, here is an original talent. The music is masculine in its rugged force, utterly feminine in its purity and lyrical outpouring. Honegger, Poulenc, Rousseau, to name but three who outlived her, owe Lili much. Let us hear more of her. Let us know what we have missed and what we have been offered."